We were in the old pet shop as I was deciding on a puppy. I had been saving all my money from chores. I had been saving up for weeks. There were 10 small puppies in a big cage. Most of them were jumpy and happy. That was not me. Then, a small little chocolate Labrador was curled up in the corner of the enormous cage. The way the puppy looked into my eyes, it looks like it had given up. Come on, Dad said, looking at his watch. I chose the one that had the sad eyes. The shopkeeper picked it up with care and gently put the puppy in the cage. We exited the pet shop. We got in the car and drove home. We got to the apartment and said hi to the old man who stared at the puppy. We got home and made the bed. The puppy scolded to go to bed early that night. I heard it cry. I looked around and I didn't see anything, so I went back to bed. Then I heard a sound you hear when the tap is on. I looked around in the bathroom. I saw nothing, so I went back to bed. I heard it once more. I looked in the bathroom and turned the lights on. The puppy was hanging dead, dipped in blood, and had a twisted neck from the dangling light. I screamed and screamed. Who murdered my puppy? Who murdered my puppy? Chapter 2. The Smile. My eyes turned big into holes. The horror of the dead animal filled my heart with fear. Dad and Mum ran out of bed, and Dad got his hunting rifle and ran into the bathroom, still loading the gun. Dad looked in shock as he stared at the corpse in horror. Mum came in screaming her head off, and the old man came rushing in to see what was happening. Mum came to greet him. "Hello, Mr. Oakley," Mum said, who was still scared to death. I heard a scream, which I believe came from this room. Oh, that was Lucy having a nightmare. Must have been a scary night then. Indeed, I came out for a lolly Dad said I could have. I saw Mr. Oakley do a smile, more of a grin. Mum looked at me. "What do you need?" I looked at Mum. "Never mind," and I walked off back to bed frightened. The next day, I did not go to school because of what had happened last night. Who would have done it? We do not have any other animals in the house. All I had was close to an animal was a doll which smiled at me very hard. It was made by my grandmother before she died with the doll in her room. I pieced it all together. Doll. The doll had murdered the puppy. Had the shock of my life, I knew what I had to do. When I walked to school, I took the doll with me. I found an alley with a trash can. I shoved the doll in there and ran away. What I did not notice was the shopkeeper's boy needed to take out of the trash and found the doll and picked it up and kept it. This is presumably chapter 3, but it is not titled. The Starting Kills. The boy showed it to his dad. "Put it in your room." "Okay, Papa," the boy replied. At midnight, the boy got up to get a glass of water. When he got back to his bed, the doll had moved 4 steps, but he did not notice, so the got back up into his bed. This time, the doll was coming up the ladder, but he was asleep. The next time, the doll moved. He opened his eyes to find that the doll was right up at his face with a knife. There was one scream and then the sound of stabbing cake. It was his skin. The next move was to his mother, but he left the father to live in suffering. After the murders, the father held the doll. Trying to call the police, the doll stamped the father, and like a snake, the doll creeped out of the house to find its next victim. All this time, I was at school with questions in my head thinking about the doll. When school had finished, I went through my grandma's stuff and found a picture of her and the doll. Back then, the doll seemed full of life and happy. I also found a letter that said, "Anne, help my parents and all my family have gone to a better place. I am alone and hungry. Please help. They are coming. Please, I need you." From Georgia, 1941. I had to go on to the internet to find out what it said because it was Polish. My mum was watching the news on the edge of her seat. Mum was in shock because of the news her family had been murdered. Mum was so shocked because that was the way I walked to school every day. Mum got up in shock and said she was going to take me to school in the car from now on. I found that house was right next to the bin I'd put the doll in. The police found no evidence of the murder. That was then I saw a trail of blood had been hanging in the same place as the puppy was. He had been covered in oil and burned alive. Untitled, but presumably chapter 3. The Fate of Rose. I hopped in my mother's electric blue Volkswagen Beetle. It was odd driving to school because it gave me a sense of safety and luxury. Mum tried to avoid the crime scene, but the road was closed. We were stuck in traffic for hours, and worse, it was right near the crime scene. I couldn't help but gaze upon the old and neglected apartment block where the boy once lived. It was at that point when I saw my best friend Rose. "Hey bud, you want to walk with me?" Mom, not wanting me to be late for school, reluctantly said fine. As Rose and I walked the neglected city streets, I noticed a just as neglected doll in her highlighted green bag. "Where did you get that?" I asked, concerned. "It's a souvenir from the crime scene. Don't tell." I reluctantly complied that night. She died. The end. The doll with his floppy and did diss track saying Rose then burned and covered in oil. Caused the roast was too good. Her grandma later. Then the doll turned into his final form, Jake Paul. A 1940 Spitfire blew up her house. Rose tried to escape while on fire and covered in oil by getting into her Toyota Corolla, and a fireman gets in his Toyota 86 AE and pisses on her since the hose wasn't working. And that's the end of the script. Was an honor to read.
Covered in spit and tears.